I'm going to tackle a kind of controversial topic today. If when you hear psychology, you think counseling, and if when you hear depression, you think chemical imbalance, then this one is for you. So a lot of what you might have heard about depression and anxiety is not necessarily up to date. Positive psychology is a groundbreaking new science, and its research has shattered a lot of what we once believed about mental health and mental illness. I'm Kirsty Bauer, and I'm here to share some Wednesday wisdom with you. I'm the founder of Positive EQ, where I help kind, ambitious people to feel genuinely happy. So that means believing in yourself, feeling content with your life, and feeling hopeful about the future. So today I'm going to be talking about positive psychology, and I'm going to be comparing it to the psychology that you've always heard about. I am so passionate about positive psychology. I sometimes get a little bit over passionate if people ask me about it. I can't stop learning about it. I am currently also completing my master's part-time as well as running my company. And in the evenings, I'm often reading positive psychology books. So I hope that by the end of this live, you're going to love the subject as much as I do, and not think that I'm totally crazy about thinking that it's so great. So there's so many situations where I'll tell people that I am a positive psychology coach, and they'll say to me, positive psychology, what does that mean? Or they'll just give me a strange look, and I'll, say to them, do you actually, do you know what it is? And they'll say, well, I know what psychology is. So I'm going to be explaining to you today exactly what the difference between the normal psychology that you've always heard about is and positive psychology. And I'm going to say upfront that it's not just plain positive thinking. It is so much more than that. It goes so much deeper, and we're going to dive into that today. We're then also going to be talking about what positive psychology means for depression and anxiety, and how does it compare to traditional treatments that you've heard about. So you might have heard about cognitive behavioral therapy. Obviously, you probably know about psychotherapeutic drugs like anti-anxiety medication or antidepressants. So we're going to be comparing positive psychology exercises and interventions and looking at them in relation to conventional treatments and see what works better if we can even compare them. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at what the research says about how we can, what it takes to create sustainable change in our happiness. So changes that last, right? Because it doesn't help us if we go through kind of a year of really hard work trying to feel happy, and we kind of get to a certain place and we just revert. That's really painful and disappointing. So those are kind of the three things that we're going to be covering, and I guarantee it that you're going to find it really, really fascinating. So what separates positive psychology from the normal psychology that you've always heard about? Psychology is a brand new science. So it is only 19 years old. It was founded just 19 years ago by a man called Dr. Martin Seligman. And he felt that psychology wasn't focusing enough on the positive side of things, in a sense that psychology conventionally for so many years had been looking at problems and what is wrong with people and how can we kind of fix what's wrong so that they feel better. And the goal of conventional psychology, ironically, was not actually to make people happy, but just to get them free from suffering. So Freud said, I'm sure you've heard of Freud, Freud said, the greatest we can hope for is to be free from suffering. It's pretty pessimistic, right? So what we believed kind of before, at least what convention we were subscribing to, was that psychology was meant to take us from -5 to 0. And after that, we'd be at 0, we'd be free from suffering, but that's not exactly +5, is it? It's not feeling happy, feeling good, having high well-being, feeling like our lives are worth living, and we definitely let go of that myth now. And positive psychology seeks to take people from 0 to +5. So it's about that whole spectrum of human experience and moving into making a life that we really, really feel is worth living. So you might have heard of positive psychology called the science of happiness, but it's really so much deeper than that. So it is, we can call it so many things: the science of well-being, of resilience, or of human flourishing, of what makes life worth living. So this Dr. Martin Seligman that I spoke about, he said that we need to be looking at the happy people. You know, there are people who are living in the same world, and they don't necessarily always have more, right? But they, for some reason, are happier. So we need to look at, okay, yes, what things do they have in their life, in a psychological sense, not in a sense of I have a lot of money or something like that, although we do study whether that makes a difference, and I'll talk about that in an upcoming live. We need to be looking at what do the happy people have, and then how are they looking at the world, and what are they thinking about things. I'm sure you'll agree that how a pessimist responds to a situation and how an optimist responds to a situation can be completely different. Let's say that someone breaks their leg. A pessimistic response would be someone who says, this is the absolute worst thing that could have happened, the timing is awful, I have to stay inside all day now, I can't go to work, I can't do anything, any of the things I love, and you really see it as really, really awful that this thing happened. And an optimist instead, in that exact same situation, looks at the bright side and says, wow, I broke my leg, but I'm so, so grateful that it wasn't worse, right? And that's an entirely different response to the same situation. So what's different about the optimist's thinking, and how can we look at that and learn that pattern and equip people with that pattern so that they can live happier lives where they feel more positive, they feel more content, and they feel good enough, they believe in themselves, everything like that. So a critical difference between positive psychology and what we can call normal psychology is that positive psychology is strength focused, and it's focused on solutions and building positive capacities. Normal psychology is actually negative focused, it's problem focused, and it is focused on remedying problems. So to give you an example, this is like looking at, let's say, a couple that is going for relationship help, right? And they go and see a traditional relationship therapist. And many relationship therapists work like this. They will approach the problem by making the couple sit there and saying, okay, let's air all your differences. Let's look at everything that's going wrong and try and fix those things, right? And we are essentially in that space teaching the couple to fight better, right? And in a positive psychology space, what we would instead do is we would say, let's look at what's working. Let's look at how we can leverage what's working to lift up all the weaker areas, how we can make those areas that work more often, right? And how can we make that the norm? And what we'd be doing is saying, let's teach the couple to love each other better rather than to fight better. You see the contrast? Positive psychology also deals with trauma in quite a different way that normal psychology, traditional psychology would. So in traditional psychology, you might have heard about post-traumatic stress, and at the far end of the spectrum, post-traumatic stress disorder. So that would be how a counselor would deal with it, certain types of counselors. And in positive psychology, you may never have heard of this, but there's actually a concept called post-traumatic growth. Wonderful research has shown that so many people after going through trauma experience this incredible personal growth. Often they come out of dealing with that experience and they say things like, I stopped caring what people thought. I knew what was really important in life. I decided that I had the courage to follow my dreams. So both can be really complementary with each other. You can see how in trauma, we kind of need to move through both, right? And possibly in a relationship, we need to move through both too. But that's really how you can see how it was formed, in fact, as a complement, so that therapy could take you from -5 to 0, and positive psychology could take you from 0 to +5. But as we move on to the second topic that I wanted to cover, which is the impact of positive psychology and interventions versus normal therapeutic treatments like drugs and antidepressants, psychotherapeutic drugs, that's what I mean, not any other type of drugs, and therapy, and looking at kind of what works better. So as I just said, positive psychology was originally founded to kind of take people from 0 to +5, right? And it didn't really want to deal with any of that negative side, and we didn't think that it could necessarily. But over the last 19 years, we found some really, really fascinating things. So positive psychology interventions, let me just get a definition out of the way so that you don't, so that you understand what I mean. What I mean by positive psychology intervention, there might be an activity, it might be an exercise that you have to do, just any kind of sort of new habit training. So these come in various forms. They're things that you, it could be journaling, it could be, there's so many different forms, but think of them as activities or exercises that you bring into your daily life to cultivate certain positive emotions. So initially, the intention was not, those were not created to be used with people who are experiencing depression and anxiety. But in the last 19 years of this science being around, there have obviously been studies that have come out and have tried positive psychology interventions with people who are struggling with anxiety and depression. And the results have been absolutely phenomenal. So we found that positive psychology interventions, when they're applied correctly, so obviously you want a professional to show you which ones to apply, things like that, and when to apply them and how to apply them, then we're seeing massive changes in how people feel. And so not only are we taking people from 0 to 5, but when we're using positive psychology interventions, we're bringing in positive emotions, and we're also pulling people out of negative emotions often. So they can be incredibly powerful with depression and anxiety. Now, what if you get absolutely anything from today's Facebook Live, from this section especially, it would be that there are more options than you maybe thought there are. Most people have only ever heard about depression and anxiety in the traditional sense, right? We hear that it's a brain imbalance and all that we can do is take medication. And if maybe you've heard a little more, maybe you've heard that you can go for cognitive behavioral therapy. And both of those have been tested, and we're able to say, okay, they work a certain amount of the time. But what I find really, really sad and what really upsets me is that we often don't know that there is any other option, right? And the fact remains that a lot of the time, for a large proportion of people, psychotherapeutic drugs like antidepressants and anti-anxiety tablets don't work for many people. If they work for you, that's absolutely fantastic, and like you're one of the lucky ones, which is fantastic. But if they don't work for you, it can be really, really difficult to accept that. And I've met people who say, I tried to go on medication, but it didn't make a difference to me. And their response is kind of, now what? I don't know what to do. They're not told there is anything else that they can do, but there absolutely is. And cognitive behavioral therapy has also been shown to be pretty effective as long as you implement the exercises, right? And the same is true for positive psychology, but the difference in positive psychology is that the exercises are really fun. So they're much easier to keep and to sustain them because we actually enjoy them, right? So I'm going to read something from Martin Seligman's book, Flourish. He is the founder of positive psychology. I've mentioned him a few times. And this chapter is actually called The Dirty Little Secret of Drugs and Therapy. And it might be quite surprising what you hear. And all I want to show you is that they're really, this is not a hard and fast solution, and that we do have more options. So he says here that consider 2 treatments that are certified by vast literatures to work: cognitive therapy for depression, which changes how you think about bad events, and selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, also called SSRIs, such as Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro, and so on. Taking an average over the entire huge literature, for each, you get a 65% relief rate. So they work 65% of the time, accompanied by a placebo effect that ranges from 45% to 55%. So now the placebo effect is what happens when we expect that a drug is going to work for us. So they'll do studies to test whether medicine works, and to half of the people, they'll say, you've been given the medication, and they'll only give them sugar pills, and the other half of people will actually get the actual antidepressant, right? And what they found is that even the people who get sugar pills, they improve by 45 to 55%. And the people who get the real antidepressants improve by 65%, as in 65% of the people improve. That's what I mean. So there's not a very big difference there. And that's, he states that it's similar for CBT, it's for cognitive behavioral therapy, that it's also 65% of people will benefit from it and the rest won't. And so what I really want to do today is just open your mind to the fact that there are other options, and that if you are in that 35% of people that pills aren't working for, or that CBT isn't working for, you don't have to feel like there is nothing else that you can do. If medications work for you, then what I'm saying is I'm so happy for you, and that there's something else that you can supplement that with, should you feel like you want to or you even need to. If you are someone that medication hasn't worked for, then I'm saying that there's something else that you can do. And if you're someone who doesn't want to go on medication, I have met a bunch of people who, for their own personal reasons, they just say it's not something that they want to do. They don't want to go on medication. And then their logic is kind of like, well, then I have to suffer. And I think that's a really hard choice to have to make. So then I'm also saying there is another option. The research has found that positive psychology exercises are more sustainable than CBT and than antidepressants and anti-anxiety tablets, because what's actually happening is it's pretty much just that people are keeping to them better, but we also do get a bigger result than 65%. I can't give you an exact specific number, only because there are so many different exercises. So if I were to tell you all the different ones, it would be crazy. Some of them increase from, in the short term, and some of them increase long term. And obviously long term is what we want, but if you're doing short term and you keep doing them, you're going to have a really, really big, good benefit. So I hope that from that, you're able to see that there are more options than we often see broadcast in the media. And this is just because positive psychology is 19 years old. If we're looking at the founding of a field, this is a scientific field, 19 years is not a lot of time at all. It's not a lot of time to do research, because research studies can take 10, 20 years, some of them. I know you've probably seen articles flying around Cape Town. I mean, what did I say? I'm going to Cape Town soon, so I'm messing up my words. Flying around Facebook and talking about the lifelong happiness study that tracked people from across their whole lives. That's decades worth of research. And if we're talking about looking at how happy people are, we're looking now, and we're looking 6 months later, we're looking a year later, we're looking 2 years later, 5 years later. So 19 years in the founding of a field is not very long, and positive psychology is just really starting to gain traction. More people are starting to know about it. But in all the years that I've been practicing it, I only discovered it 3 years ago, but in the years that I've been practicing it, I think I've met about 3 or 4 people ever that actually properly knew what it was. So please share this video with anyone that you feel could benefit, because I really feel that people need to know that there are more options than we think, than we've been limited to think that there are. And I think that's important, to be able to have choice, to be able to say, okay, do I want to be focused on changing negative thoughts? Maybe you actually appreciate having that negative focus to deal with the negative thoughts. Then I can go to a cognitive behavioral therapist. Do I want to take medication? If you believe in medication, you can try it and see if it works for you. Do I want to build positive capacities and really learn what causes happiness, and how can I, not focus on not feeling anxious, but rather focus on feeling calm, building that capacity. And so we should be able to have that choice. So the last point that I want to talk about is what research shows that we need to do to create sustainable change in our happiness levels, because that's really, really important, right? We don't want to spend months kind of in therapy, or if you were to do positive psychology coaching, whatever we go to, and if we find it makes a difference, we're so excited, but then it doesn't last. So what we are going to talk about is how to actually make sustainable change in your happiness. So I'm going to quote Socrates, and I absolutely love this quote. I remember when I saw it, I thought, this is exactly why I started Positive EQ. And he says that the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. So the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. So instead of just looking at anxiety and saying, how can we get rid of that? How can we go from -5 to 0? We can turn our attention to work on training your brain to feel calmer. And if you watched last week's Facebook Live, to feel safer, right? Because we discussed how much anxiety comes from your heart system not feeling safe. So while initially positive psychology was created as a complement to therapy, now we're able to really use it to develop new capacities. And we don't necessarily need to use therapy to take people from -5 to 0 and then only bring in positive psychology. What we can do is actually start with positive psychology and build those positive capacities. And I'm going to just explain why this works so well. Do we need to unlearn the negatives in order to learn a positive capacity? No, we don't. So, for example, if you're having coaching with me and we uncover a thinking style that, we spoke about pessimism and optimism, right? So we discover that you would like to change a pessimistic thinking style. That's causing you a lot of emotional pain. You're feeling afraid a lot of the time. You're worrying about the future. You're afraid that things won't work out. You're dissatisfied with your achievements, things like that. What we can do, what I would do with you in coaching, is teach you a new thinking style, and then we're going to actually train your brain to implement that new thinking style. And do you agree that we don't necessarily have to completely unlearn that old thinking style when we give you this new thinking style and we train your brain to be more optimistic? That pessimistic thinking is going to fall away, because you're going to be replacing it with something that's more empowering, that's serving you better, that's making you happier. And it makes sense that we can actually swap that out, and that we don't need to start at -5 to 0, but we can actually start in the strength-based, solution-focused space and lift you out of anxious thinking, right? On a smaller example, if you're coming to me and you're saying that you want to achieve all these goals, you want to start going to gym more often, you want to eat healthier, maybe you want to start a company of your own, things like that. And you're saying, I have all these goals and I can't get myself to act on them, and they're really important to me and I'm not doing them. And what we often hear about this, which really gets to me, is when people say, okay, well then obviously you don't want it as much as you say you do. I really don't think that's true. And whether we move on something is how much we feel like it's going to work out, right? If we feel like it's going to be a total failure and we are so afraid of that, why would we do it? Even if we really want it, if we're afraid in some sense, why would we go ahead and do it? So that's what I would do with you in that situation is, I could just work with you on the goal, but that's not really going to deal with the underlying issues. The emotional intelligence capacities that I would want to build would be teaching you the skills of how do you motivate yourself? Do you know how to motivate yourself? And from research, scientific ways of motivating yourself. We would develop your self-control. We would train the part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. We would train it to have more self-control so that when you say, I want to go, or you wanted to eat healthier, right? So you're going to have the self-control to actually follow through on that and only put the healthy stuff in the shopping cart, right? You're going to have the self-control to get yourself to go to gym. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this. And I feel like it's so, so important that if we equip you with self-control and we equip you with the ability to motivate yourself, you are empowered to go and make your goals happen. Like, we don't even really need to work on those so much together, because once you have that positive emotional intelligence, that's going to make the whole world of a difference, right? And what sets positive psychology apart is that it's all evidence-based. So when I was planning on becoming a counselor, so I don't know if you know that about me, but I was planning on becoming a cognitive behavioral therapist, actually. But before that, just a counselor of any, I didn't know there were so many different types, and you might not know there are so many different types. But I was absolutely horrified to discover that most therapies are not actually tested. We don't actually know that they work. And what scares me about that is we don't know if we don't know if they're working, we also don't know if they're making things worse. And if you don't know that there are so many different kinds of therapies, how are you able to make an informed choice? It's the same about if you don't know that positive psychology exercises exist, how are you able to make an informed choice, a free choice about how to react to that? So cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the only counseling techniques that's actually shown to work, right? Many of the other ones just haven't been tested or have been shown that they don't work that well. So if you choose that positive psychology coaching is not something that's for you, and that you do like to kind of deal with the problem rather than to build the positive capacity, then I would really recommend that you do a lot of research into different therapies. And I would personally actually only recommend that you go to an evidence-based one, which would be cognitive behavioral therapy, because that then we know that you're actually making a difference. Otherwise, we really don't know. So in positive psychology, anything that I recommend, any exercises that I give, any framework that I coach, anything, it comes from research. And that was kind of one of the major things that attracted me to positive psychology, apart from this building of positive capacities, which I just felt like made so much sense and makes it so much more sustainable. The whole reason that I called positive EQ is because I really believe that if we develop our ability to be intelligent about our emotions, and we are able to use those emotions to create a positive life and to create positive feelings, but also positive capacities. I don't want to just say feelings. I don't look at as I said, positive psychology is not just positive thinking. So if you're coming with you're sad about something, that's absolutely valid. And I feel like those emotions are really important. And I'm not going to patronize you by saying, oh, we should just look on the bright side. But you can get something good out of negative, in the sense that you can learn a really valuable lesson for the future. You can get a sense of meaning and purpose out of that. That's kind of going back to the post-traumatic growth that I spoke about. So everything that we do in positive psychology is it's backed up, and we know that it works, and it's looking at you as a whole person, right? So I'm going over time here, so I should definitely finish off. I knew when I did a topic I was passionate about that I was going to keep talking forever. I think it's twice as long as my last live stream. So just to summarize, what we found is that positive psychology is really holistic. It is the study, the scientific study of what makes not just a happy life, but a life that is truly meaningful, in which you are resilient. It is the study of the good life, and whatever the good life means to you, right? That changes from person to person. But it's about creating a life in which you are flourishing and you feel great. You're thinking about the world and looking at the world as an optimist does. So you feel less afraid, you feel hopeful, and you're also feeling content with what you have. You accept yourself, you feel content with who you are and what you've achieved and where you are. And so that's what positive psychology does. And in comparison to cognitive behavioral therapy, it's much more sustainable. So we found that cognitive behavioral therapy works really well while you're in therapy, but it tends to have diminishing effects over time. People generally really struggle to keep it up because it's not that fun. It takes a lot of effort. And my personal view, and I do know in positive psychology, maybe it's not completely my personal view, it's other people's views too, is that in positive psychology, we don't keep doing an exercise if you start to resent having to do it. It's kind of not serving its purpose anymore, because if you resent having to do it, that's bringing negative emotion in, which now you're just bringing more negative emotion into your life. So it's really, really important that you enjoy whatever you're having to do to maintain your happiness. And in positive psychology, that's exactly what we do. So we've expanded our options. If you are suffering from depression and anxiety, or even at a lower level, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling down some days, there is absolutely something you can do. And you are not limited to medication or CBT. There's something you can do that's fun and sustainable. It's easier to maintain things that are fun, right? I do them all the time and I still really enjoy all my exercises. If you would like to learn more about this, please join me in my Facebook group. We are a wonderful community of kind, ambitious people, all joining together to feel content with our lives and hopeful and positive about the future, not in terms of being positive. Psychology is not positive thinking. We are united in feeling positive and believing in ourselves and being able to cultivate whatever the good life is to us. I have really enjoyed talking to you today. I hope that you've left having taken a little bit of my passion, and there's more than enough to go around for positive psychology. And I really, really hope to see you in the group. There is a link in the description of this video. I will see you next week for some Wednesday wisdom at 3 p.m. and I look forward to it.